Well, hello, everyone. Hello, all of you joining us now on the webinar, and to all of you joining us also on social media. We are also on Facebook Live. Welcome to the the fifth segment of the symposium, Filaments of the Atlantic Heritage, put forth by the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute. That's PBBI from California State University, Fresno. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are happy to have all of you on. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to all the participants that are here and logging on as we talk. And thanks to all of you following us on social media. We began yesterday at noon with our opening ceremonies, and the president or the vice president, I should say, of the government of the Azores, Dr. Lima, was one of our guests, as long as also with the I'm having trouble talking today, which that's not normally happen, but once in a while it does happen. So the Consul General of Portugal in San Francisco, Maria João Lopes Cardoso, was also with us, and we had an awesome presentation by Dr. Rui Faria from the Azorean Immigrant Association from San Miguel, from the islands of the Azores. That was really wonderfully done. And so last night we had our first panel called Beyond the Festa, constructing the Azorean diaspora in the U.S. This afternoon, we had two sessions, both of them in Portuguese, one at 12 and one at 1. And this is our second one, which is Beyond Saudade, that very Portuguese word that's very hard to translate, but most of you following us know that it means longing, a sense of missing someone, something, a place, a little bit of myth in it as well, a little bit of Dom Sebastião, our king that was young and went out to conquer Africa and never came back. And we lost independence to the Spanish for 80 years. And so a little bit of all that is put into the word saudade. So beyond saudade, beyond missing people in a place, because all of our panelists are born here in the United States and they're second or third generation. So beyond saudade, Azoreanness in the second and third generation in the US. So we're going to try to keep this to 1 hour and maybe 5 to 10 minutes at the most. Try to be done by 6:10 Pacific time. Welcome to those that are following us in the East Coast. And we already have some folks joining us from mainland Portugal and also from the Azores. And so thanks to Rui Faria for being here present in the audience, the president of the Azores Immigrant Association, and our very good friend Miguel Vaz from FLAD is also joining us from Lisbon, Portugal, and a couple of the people I see also from mainland Portugal. So welcome to each and every one of you. Our theme is the Azores, and all of you have a connection in one way or another to it. I'm going to go to the first part, so I'm going to ask you very quickly, if you can, if you can take 2 to 3 minutes. I know that's hard for all of us who are Azorean and Portuguese, but if you can keep it under 3 minutes, that's possible. We won't cut you off. There won't be a yellow light or a red light as there is in some of the speaker forums in Congress and everything else. But if you can keep it to 2 to 3 minutes to introduce yourself and tell us your Azorean connection. In other words, who in your family immigrated? Was it your parents, grandparents, etc.? We'd like to know that to kind of establish a little bit of the playing field and folks to know how you're connected to the Azores. So we won't talk about how the culture influences you or anything like that. Just your name, what you do, what you're involved in a little bit, and about your connection to the Azores. We'll start with Alexis.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Denise, for having us. Hello, everyone. My name is Alexis Aureus. I am a student, incoming student body president at the University of Southern California, where I'm studying political science. But most importantly, and of course, why we're all here, is I am also a proud Azorean descendant. It was my bisavoj that came over from the Azores to the United States from Terceira. And like many of us Portuguese Californians, my family settled in the Central Valley in Los Banos, where they started the Aureus dairy and ran it successfully for a little over 70 years. And so fast forward all these years later, we're no longer in the dairy business, but still proud Portuguese and still proud of our Azorean roots. And so I'm kind of at a point in my life now where it's my turn to keep the tradition alive. And that's something that's really important to me, something that has become, much more important to me over the past year. So just really excited to be here with all of you today, speaking, about our amazing shared heritage and our love for these 9 islands. So that's a little bit about us. Thank you, Denise, again.
Thank you, Alexis. And then a little bit of a name drop. Some of you already know Alexis' father's a famous Portuguese American from the Azores, Rusty Areias, who served in the State Assembly for a few terms. And also, she has this unique thing that she, amongst other things, she's one, I think, probably the first Azorean-American to be elected student body president of University of Southern California, USC. And also, the other aspect of it is that she was just in Portugal. She did in the Azores she saw a change of governments in an election that was was not called that way. Talk about the polls being wrong. She was there when they changed government, and she was there for doing an internship with the government of the Azores, and she taught herself Portuguese, which that's amazing. Kathy.
Hi everyone, and Denise, thank you for including me in this. I think it's important, and I'm excited to share my story. I am the granddaughter of Azorean immigrants. My father's parents each came separately from Treseda. My grandfather was an orphan, and he came in 1911. And then in 1917, my grandmother came, and the two had never met on Treseda because they lived in villages that were like 5 miles apart, and nobody ever traveled that far. But they met and married on November the 17th, 1917 at St. Peter's Church in Lemoore, California. And they started a dairy farm in Riverdale. They had 6 children and lots of grandchildren. And I was one of the younger grandchildren, so I didn't know my grandparents as well as my older cousins, but their story fascinates me. And while we were growing up, my grandfather did bring family members from the Azores to work on the dairy. And I grew up with children and family friends and relations my age from the Azores also. And that gave me a very good insight to Azorean life. So
Wonderful. And I should add that Kathy published the family book. The story did a lot of research, and it's a wonderful book and shows the true spirit of Azoreans in California. Thank you, Kathy. And Tisha Cardozo, a good friend from Selma.
Yes. Good evening. Yes, Tisha Cardozo. My profession is I'm an associate distribution engineer for Pacific Gas and Electric Company. My family came from the island of Peak. So for me, both of I'm only half Portuguese, or if you believe the ancestry DNA test, 48.3. So 48.3% Portuguese, and it's on my mother's side. So both of my mother's parents were born here. So my grandparents were both born here. And on my grandfather's side, his parents came over separately. My great grandmother was a Betancourt, and she came over with her family. Her dad came over and then sent for the rest of them. And then my great grandpa Cardozo, he came over to avoid going into the military and being sent out of the country. So he came over with his brothers. Came to his brothers. They were already here. He was one of the younger ones. Then somehow they both made their way to Selma, and they met and they got married here in Selma, and they had like 9 children. I don't know the counts from there. I just know I'm the oldest great grandchild. So I did get to know my great grandmother. I mean, she was already a lot older, but she actually outlived my grandfather. So I was able to at least meet her. She only spoke Portuguese, so we didn't have much of a conversation, but I did get to at least meet her, and I still have stories about her. On my grandmother's side, her mother immigrated over. Her mother came first. So my grandmother's grandmother came over, got married, and then sent for my great grandmother. So she came over in her 20s. And then, but on my grandmother's father's side, her father was actually born here. So that makes me a 4th generation on one side and a 3rd on the other. and her grandfather came over to the country in the mid 1850s. So he's actually one of the first settlers here. And in fact, the vineyard that we have here in Salma still, the ditch that runs in the back is called Silva Canal, because he was the one that put it there, and he was one of the first settlers. So
wow, cool.
yeah, and then his story is when he was leaving the Azores, he had some friends. They had a cute daughter, and he swore he'd go back and marry her, and he did. So quite an age difference, but he did go back, marry her, and bring them here, and that's why all of their children were here. So
fantastic. And of course, Tisha is involved with the Selma Portuguese Hall, very involved. I think, are you president again or no?
No.
Okay, but she has been president and has had various roles, and of course, very active with SPRSI and Luso Education Foundation as well. Angela Costa Simões. Angela, there we are.
Hi, Denise. Thanks for inviting me to be on this panel. And I apologize to everybody. I'm at the airport, so it was quiet earlier, but just got noisy all of a sudden. But so I'm third generation Portuguese American on both sides. My dad's family is from Saudade and my mom's family is from Guarda. So I'm Azorean on my dad's side. And it was both of his sets of grandparents that came over in the early 1900s as well. And so as far as I know, they came direct to California because they had, I think it was friends that were here. I don't think they had relatives here yet, and went straight to the Central Valley. So Stockton, Roberts Island is where my father grew up. And we have family all throughout Lodi, Thornton, Escalon. So those were our stomping grounds when I was a child.
Fantastic. And we should add that Angela is the almighty chairperson for the Portuguese American Leadership Council of the United States, PALCUS. I say she's the best chairperson of any Portuguese American organization from here to Mars, because we're already in Mars and we haven't found any Portuguese organization that's better than PALCUS at the national level, that is. And so thanks, Angela, for your service. And she's the most Azorean of a half-breed Azorean that's fully Azorean as well. And so Carol Ann.
Thank you, Denise, for having me. My name is Carol Gregory. My profession is I've been an associate planner for the County of Sacramento for the past 20 years. I've been very active in the Sacramento's Portuguese community historically, and also in the San Jose Portuguese community. But my heritage is my mom was full Portuguese. Her mother was born in Feiteira, Faial, in the Azores in 1912. Her parents and her immigrated to the United States when she was only a year and a half years old, and they settled in Hollister, California. And then on my grandfather's side, he was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts, but his mother was from São João Pico in the Azores. And then also his father was from Furnace, São Miguel in the Azores. So I have roots from São Miguel, Pico, and Faial. And I've been doing a lot of family history and genealogy research related to that and finding distant cousins. Actually, Tisha and I are cousins on the Cardoza side. So, so I find that very, very interesting, just find different relatives and cousins as I've been doing family history and genealogy.
I'm on mute, and I was saying hello to your son because I know he likes to say hello to people on mute. How are you? And so thank you all. We're going to go to the first question, which is quite simple, and again, a few minutes for each one, if you don't mind. Have you always been connected to the culture, or is it something that you came to at a later time? We all have our own stories, and so have you always been connected to the culture? Or was it something that you came into a later time? And how did you get connected, or how do you remember getting connected with the culture? Some of you speak a little bit of Portuguese, others do not, but you're all very into the identity. So how did that come about? And I'll start with Carol this time. We'll do a little bit of a switch. So Carol Ann.
So I wasn't raised in the Portuguese culture, and I wasn't raised Catholic as well. I became more involved in the Portuguese culture and the Portuguese community when I was a graduate student at the University of California, Davis. I was in a program in community development, and I lived in the Sacramento's Green Haven pocket area at the time. And I had to do a research paper on the history of the community. And ironically, in that community, historically, there was a large Portuguese population that settled in that area. And then as I began doing research on the community, I just became very fascinated by its history. And there was an organization in Sacramento called the Portuguese Historical and Culture Society that was formed in 1979. And I found that organization very interesting because they were founded to promote the preservation of the Portuguese heritage and culture in the Pocket area. And being a government employee and working on planning and in subdivisions, they had lobbied the city of Sacramento when the area was being developed to make sure that there was street names that bear Portuguese family names. There's a park there in Sacramento that is of Portuguese orientation. They lobbied the Sacramento City Unified School District to have a school named Lisbon Schools. So that whole story was very interesting in learning about Portuguese culture in the community in Sacramento. And from that, I went on in grad school to get my PhD in geography at UC Davis. I wanted to further expand understanding where the Portuguese settled in California and just learn about all the other Portuguese communities in California. So I did my dissertation work on studying the Portuguese cultural landscape, and then just looking at all the Portuguese halls, churches, street names, just doing an inventory of where the Portuguese settled and their population, and what landscape features bear Portuguese history and place names, and just doing an inventory. So that was my dissertation work. And during that time, that was almost 20 years ago, I had gotten involved with the Portuguese Heritage Publications and Tony Gallard, and I had helped do research for the Portuguese Holy Ghost Festa book. I worked on that and did that. And I've been involved in the Portuguese Historical Society in Sacramento, just trying to, I worked on the board of directors and worked in their events and so forth. So it's just been my schooling and so forth has brought me into the Portuguese culture and community. And then from that, I've done more genealogy research and studied my family history, and then found cousins in the process as well. So it's been a learning experience for me for the past 20 years, and understanding the Portuguese community and the Portuguese culture.
Indeed, it's fascinating. And by the way, Carol Ann's book, or it will be a book. Bruma Publications is working on it. She's working on it with us on her dissertation because we need it published. It's a fascinating work with, I mean, all the street names, parks, everything that's Portuguese in California. It's a work that we really need to as a reference. And and how cool is it that that you're doing all your genealogy research and finding all these cousins. I mean, I need to do my genealogy research just because I would like to be Tisha Cardozo's cousin, and I'm not. And so how cool is that? And so from Carol, we'll go to Alexis. Alexis, how has that connection happened for you?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think I relate to Carol a little bit in the sense that I think, growing up, it was not something that I was super aware of. In fact, I always knew, of course, that my father was a proud, Portuguese, as they say. And he, we were proud to be Portuguese, but I don't think I even knew what the Azores were until I was probably 14. And my parents said, we're taking a trip, we're going to the Azores. And I was like, what is this place? And so, we got there, and of course it was something that, had this such a weird feeling. I felt like I was at home, in so many ways. And that really sparked my interest. But it wasn't until probably this past year, honestly, that the quarantine started. I decided I'm going to start learning Portuguese, really pushed for that starting in March, and figured what is the best way that I can make the most out of this quarantine experience in online school. And so I decided I want to go to the Azores, and I, of course, ended up going to work for an intern for the Azorean government there. And that was a point in time where, I started doing my genealogy, and it was really a pivotal moment for me where I feel like I'm just part of something much larger. I'm sure that's something that so many of you could probably relate to. But yeah, that was really my story in finding my Azorean roots and kind of coming back in touch with that. And I think, of course, the Portuguese aspect of it, learning Portuguese and being able to communicate and doing all that stuff, it really, it's a much more profound way of becoming in touch with your roots in that sense. And so been very fortunate to learn in that way. And similar to Carol, found some long lost cousins in the process, and it's been really fun. So that's a little bit about my journey, kind of getting in touch with my own.
That's fascinating that it's been through education, and that just opens up some new doors for us. We should explore that even more and more in the different colleges and universities, and having a bigger presence, because it would help, I believe, some students who want to explore that a little bit more and then do some exchange programs. So, Tisha, how did you come onto the Portuguese, to the cultural connection of the Azores and your family?
Yes. So I was raised by my grandmother. So there wasn't a choice but to be involved in the Portuguese community here in Salma. It was back then, as I'm a child, as a teenager in the 90s. So every night when I didn't have FFA or band, because I was allowed to participate in those, but everything else was Portuguese related. It was when there were 7 fraternal organizations, it was third Tuesday IDS, third Sunday SPR-Psi. It was just all over the place. That was my schedule, going to meetings. And because I was young and I could work, it was going to work. So the hall didn't necessarily look appealing, because every time I went there, I'm dumping trash, I'm picking up plates, I'm doing whatever. But, and I did it because I was told to do it, and that's what you did. Grandma told you to do something, so you did it. So, but from that, I did eventually, become a junior officer for SPR-Psi, and then eventually became grand president, for 2 years there in 2008, 2010. So I did find my own loves for certain individual things, but as a child, it was participating in everything. I think as soon as I could walk, and I still hate wearing dresses to this day, but there's all kinds of pictures of being, the little flower girl in the parade, to being little queen, to being big queen. So it was everything. She didn't teach me the language, but she also chose not to teach her children the language. And the story was because when she went into elementary school, she only spoke Portuguese, and they thought she spoke Spanish. And so she always was kind of embarrassed till finally some aide or someone came in and goes, she doesn't understand you because she doesn't speak Spanish, she's Portuguese. So from that experience, her and my grandfather decided not to teach their children, unfortunately. So of course the grandchildren didn't learn. I mean, I learned some basics to close the door, and, some words maybe you can't repeat here right now, but, very basic stuff as far as the language. For her, it was mostly to make sure we were involved in the culture, which was primarily the festa and the fraternal organization. So I was fortunate in that regard. And it was also my grandma that got me into the genealogy. So that way we, something we did together, and I'm very happy we were able to do it together. And so I do pick it up from now and then. And yeah, it was actually when I did the festa, the Portuguese Hall panel with you. And then all of a sudden I got a message from Carol. And then, yeah, sure enough, with the ancestry DNA, we were related. So it is really cool. And maybe we could be cousins, Denise,
Sure. Well, we need to find. I have some distant cousins in Pico, so I think we are cousins. That would be a treat. And so a little bit, and indeed, and that's very interesting that that you were kind of forced to do it and as a child, and didn't appreciate as much, and didn't like some of the things, but then grew into it as you had a little bit more of an appreciation for the culture. That's unique.
Absolutely. And I consider myself very blessed, but I really think if she wouldn't have pushed me as a child, and I don't know, she didn't push her children. I mean, they did how to do the queen things and the altar boy stuff and those types of things, but they weren't in the societies other than just a membership. So I don't know if she felt she missed an opportunity there, or, grandparents love grandchildren better than children. So maybe that's why I got spoiled a little bit.
That's right. Angela, tell us a little bit about your connection to the culture.
Since I was born, Denise, we grew up in the Portuguese community. So like Carol, I didn't grow up in the pocket area of Sacramento, but I was born and raised in Sacramento. And my cousins and I were angels on floats before we could even walk. And so, going to the festas every weekend was part of growing up. That's kind of all we knew. And I really credit my parents and my grandparents and, my aunts and uncles for continuing to take us. And we were, I think I was side maid 4 times, queen twice, carried rosaries and flags. Almost every parade for every year until I was about 17, I was marching. And, but my parents and my aunts and uncles, they made it fun for us. Like we would go to Gustine and it would be a whole weekend, and we'd spend, we'd be at the hotel, and we'd go to the dance on Saturday, and we'd go to Monterey. And so it really helped shape me as an individual, especially in my high school years, when you're so formidable, and you're trying to figure out who you are. Do you fit in? Do you not? And I will tell you, I actually stopped going to high school dances because I preferred to go to the Portuguese dances, because you could actually dance with a partner, with a boy, as opposed to like all the girls being on one side and all the boys being on the other. And I just felt so much more at home at the Portuguese hall. And so I was very entrenched in the festa scene, if you will. And then, one year my mom and my aunt said, hey, there's this organization that your grandparents and we belong to called Luso, and we think you guys should get involved. So we got involved in Luso and went to convention, and we held some offices. And that's when we started the dance, like kind of getting into dance. Though it was really more I guess what you would call like the popular dancing, festas populares, because we weren't really doing traditional folklore. And then I took a bit of a break in college, but then when I came back to the Bay Area, I got involved in the Dia de Portugal festival in San Jose. And so I did that for a number of years. And then I met my husband, and he roped me into the folklore, so that I was in folklore for a while. That group did dances from the Filaments region of the mainland. So it was Rancho Folclórico Portuguesa. And then, I've served on a number of boards and advisory boards, right along with you, Denise. I feel like every meeting we go to, it's like you, me, and like 5 other people. But in the past years, PALCUS has really been my focus. I've been involved with the organization for about 20 years, but it really has been my focus. And, it's funny, Tisha, you said something about, you went to the hall and you were either dumping trash or setting out plates or whatever. And this is very much the same for us. We would go and it was our job to either serve or help clean up or whatever. And while that at the time may have been a pain, man, we know how to throw a party now. And it's almost like second nature. And I can't tell you how many times, my American friends, whether we're organizing a baby shower or some other party, and it's just like, boom, 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 do this, do that, do that. And they're like, where did you learn to do all of this? And it's like, well, I grew up watching my parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles just plan festas for hundreds and hundreds of people. So, a baby shower for 25 is nothing. So yeah, to answer your question, my entire life.
Indeed. And Kathy, a little bit, how did you come upon the culture? You talked a little bit about your grandfather bringing immigrants to come and work, and so that connection, obviously.
Right. Our family dairy farm had 2 separate locations. They were one down the street from the other. My older cousins all lived on the one property close to my grandparents. So they were obviously closer to my grandparents, and my family lived down at another property. And on our property is where all of the Azorean families made their first stop. So they would come and live right by next to us, and they would grow couves and fava beans and have big gardens, and they would make soup and bring it to us. And they would bake bread and bring us fresh bread, sometimes with the egg on top of it. And so I grew up with those kids almost more than I grew up with my own cousins. Plus, my cousins had 2 parents that were Portuguese. But my father married a woman from Oklahoma. So I didn't get as much of the Portuguese influence as my cousins. But we were always in the festas. And in fact, we had lots of childhood friends that would come to visit, and we played festa. That was, we would use towels and make crowns, and we played festas, and we had to play like 6 times because there were 6 girls and everybody had to be the queen. So we would play over and over. eventually, it just got to the point that I was an adult and I wasn't as involved anymore. My cousin Al Graves published a book about Azoreans in California, and that kind of got me interested. And then as the elderly in our family started dying, my cousins Laura and Elaine and Buddy made sure that if there were anything connected to our Azorean culture, that they would share it with me. And I got fascinated and I wanted to know more. And my dad took me to Treseda in 2014. And it was a life-changing trip to stand at the orphanage where my grandfather was taken and raised, and to stand at the baptismal font where my grandmother was baptized. You know, it was just so meaningful to me that I came home and got very involved in research. In 1911, I hosted a party for my family called 100 Years in America, and it was held on the anniversary of the day my grandfather had arrived. And then in 2017, I hosted another party on what would have been my grandparents' 100th wedding anniversary. And, you know, I think my cousins appreciate it, but they don't enjoy it as much as I do. So, you know, but they make sure if there are any old photographs, any old documents, passports, things like that, they all get passed to me. So I've been able to take those and document them and use them. But then a couple years ago, I moved to Fresno and I signed up for a Portuguese language class. And Professor David Ross was my teacher. And
who I think is on, yeah.
For extra credit, he told us we could go to this event at Fresno State, the inauguration or the grand opening of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute. And Denise, I didn't know you, I didn't know anything, but I knew I needed extra credit. So I went, and it was the best thing I ever did. And I'm still not fluent in Portuguese, I'm working on it, but to be involved in this program, I've had the opportunity now to talk to lots of people about their Azorean roots and document their families and collect their oral histories and hear them tell their stories in their own words. And so I'm on fire to do this work and to research and to bring other people into all of this important work that we're doing at Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute.
Thank you, Kathy. And the family's lucky to have a family historian. Not every family has a historian, and that does all the research. They're very lucky to have you. So we're going to move on to the next question and the next thought, which is, so what are your thoughts on promoting the culture and the identity beyond some of the traditional molds that we look at? You know, the traditional aspect, the hall, the festa, and if traditional modes are still the thing that you think will are the only way that we can continue, what can we do in those traditional settings to attract third and fourth generations? Because you're kind of an elite in a lot of ways, because as I meet students, and I've met a few of them in my lifetime, is I have met students usually with third and fourth generation, they're not connected at all. I mean, they may know two words, which is call me Khaled, you know, eat and be quiet, and my shvika, because, you know, if you don't eat your food, you know, then somebody else is going to eat it for you. And then that's where the language stops. And then when culture, well, they may go to a festa, they may go occasionally because a friend is going, you know, I'm talking about for 20 some years, it was, you know, high school kids, you know, 16, 17, 18, but they were really into it. The immigrants and their kids, the first generation, were really into it, but second generation was less. Third was really less, and especially if they were half Portuguese, it was even, you know, like Kathy in her case, you know. And so, how do we, you know, what can we do in society and even in the main Portuguese American organizations? Because some of you, in the case of Angela, is very involved, of course, with Palcas, which is different than the Portuguese Hall, but it is a Portuguese organization, and Tish is very involved in the fraternal movement and the Portuguese Hall. The rest of you are not, and so how can we look at this at both angles? How do we pass on, and how do we get to third and fourth and now fifth generation involved through traditional aspects, but if those aren't working, where do we go? And even in mainstream, because both Carol and Alexis mentioned that they got connected in college. And I'm just thinking, my gosh, that's why we need more students to study in Portugal, and preferably in the Azores. Sorry, Angela. No, I mean both sides, but in the Azores and in mainland Portugal, we need people to get there, because the idea that some of you have already put forth, when you get there, that's kind of life changing. It is. I mean, I was with Henry Stern, a state senator that is not a very Portuguese name, but he's Portuguese on his mother's side. I was with him in Fayal when he was standing next to a grave of his great grandfather, and he was just crying. And and when he got off the plane in the Azores, just right off the plane, he said to me, "I've never been here, but this feels like home. I don't know why. I've traveled a lot, but this feels like home." And he's just gotten off the plane. And so, and we know that politicians have a good way with words, but he really did mean it. And the tears at his great grandfather's great, there's three of them, were real. So how do we do this? How do we get more people to the Azores? That may be one way. How do we get and how do we promote the culture at a mainstream level? I'll start with Carol. So Carol, you want to kick on that?
So I feel, the festas and carnival and all our traditional modes, we definitely still need to keep those, because that's who we are as a culture, in California especially. But again, to bridge to third, fourth generations and beyond, I think, again, you mentioned the educational aspect is really important, whether it be in colleges, universities, or whether it be through Portuguese organizations or historical societies. Like I'm involved in Sacramento's Portuguese Historical and Culture Society, where we have cultural events and we try and invite people, different generations to our cultural events. So I think just all different aspects in all organizations, we need to, bridge the gap to the third and fourth generations. For me personally, because I didn't grow up in the Portuguese community, and I'm not from Sacramento originally, I'm originally from the Bay Area. I mean, when I would go to festas and I didn't know people, I did feel like an outsider a lot. It was sort of intimidating going to a Holy Ghost festa, because I just didn't know anybody, and it was challenging at times. So I think, people like their fourth generation and just weren't and part of the culture and the heritage. I mean, I guess it can be sort of intimidating going to something like that at first, and then maybe when you meet people and know people, it gets a little better. So so that educational aspect is also very, very important, I think to look at. And then I remember yesterday in your symposium, I think Miguel Avila was talking about Dia de Portugal in San Jose, and that's more of a broader event that brings a lot of people that are non-Portuguese as well. Having things like that, I think, might be important to bring more third, fourth generation, fifth generation Portuguese Americans, and maybe doing those more on a regional scale in California, because as we know, there's Portuguese throughout California, from Arcata to San Diego. And sometimes it's hard for people living further away to get to San Jose to a Dia de Portugal event. So I just think, we still need to keep our traditions and our traditional modes, but again, work on the educational aspect, whether it be through colleges, universities, or looking to our Portuguese organizations to promote more educational type of events to bring third, fourth generation people in the community.
Thank you, Carol. Alexis, your thoughts? How do we get third and fourth generation involved?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with Carol on the educational aspect, because I think that that's such a huge part of it. Even here at USC, trying to get involved in sort of the Portuguese, just Lusophone studies in general, right? And it's very limited. And I am kind of on a mission to sort of expand that. I think what Fresno is doing is phenomenal. Really, really admire everything that you do there, Denise. But I think also, of course, the tradition dies with the young people when we, fail to carry it on. And I think that that's something that we of course, all recognize, but really need to focus on. And it's how do we connect with young people? You know, we have great organizations like PALCUS, like FLAD, who are really working to keep this culture alive and to keep these conversations going. And I think that through using medias like social media and finding ways that we can connect with young people and come down to their level. And really, I mean, I think we can all agree being Portuguese is pretty cool, but really pushing this narrative that it's being Portuguese is cool and it's a really special thing. And I think that it's becoming something that to a lot of people, it's very interesting. You know, once you kind of leave that bubble, particularly in the Central Valley, and you kind of go to other parts of California, and, you know, you tell people you're Portuguese, they're kind of like, wow, that's interesting. And I think just showing young people the vast history there, I think is really important. You know, we've talked a bit, you know, ways to connect with Azorean government and stuff in general, but we can save that, I think, for later. But I do think that's where it starts. I think it's coming down to that level with young people in this next generation, and working with them on things that they find interesting, and just exposing them, finding that willingness to hear about all the amazing things that it is to be Azorean, right? So
sure. And Angela, we've had many conversations on this, so you should have a list of about 7 action items. Okay, so give me at least.
Oh my
7.
gosh. Well, and I have more questions still than I have action items, because to Alexis's
we need
point,
action items, my dear. So we need action items.
But to Alexis's point, okay, you know, finding out what is interesting to the younger generations, what's going to be fun for them, what is going to bring them in. And I don't have answers to those questions, which is why we started the Next Gen Leadership Academy, which you're a part of, Denise. And so for those who aren't aware, the Next Gen Leadership Academy is something that PALCUS has started. It's being led by a young Portuguese American, Jordan Thomas, who is in New Jersey, and as well as Nanny Antunes and Jack De Oliveira, brainchild of Dan DuPont. But it was founded because of this very issue, right? That we need to find a way to engage the younger generations through education, through internship opportunities, through mentorship opportunities, and reaching out to them and saying, you know, here's what's possible when you are connected to your culture, your community. Here's what's possible when you speak the language. And I think that's another thing we've talked about, Denise, is, you know, everybody takes Spanish in school. Yes, we have the problem of Portuguese just isn't offered in a lot of schools, right? But even for community schools or as an extracurricular thing, I don't know that it's effectively communicated enough just how valuable it is to know and speak Portuguese. So I think, you know, that's I think there's already a lot of initiatives to promote the language, but we need more, right? The college thing, I think, is huge, not only to connect our young youth, our young people to the Azores, or even, you know, all of Portugal, but it's a lot cheaper there than it is over here. So I would really encourage those who are approaching college age, who are thinking about applying to university, you know, seriously consider attending university, not just for a summer, not just for a semester, but for, you know, a whole 4-year degree, because it's in many instances a better education than some of the schools here in the US, and certainly more affordable. And then finally, I will just say the mainstream thing is a double-edged sword for me, because I do think that we need to have a presence in more mainstream things at a small level. For example, like parades that happen in your town, right? Like a Christmas parade or the 4th of July parade or things like that. I mean, you see the Hawaiian dancers, you see, you know, the Latino club, you see all these other groups represented in these parades, and you hardly ever see a Portuguese group, right? And so, you know, what would happen if, you know, there was a Portuguese folklore group or a band or just a group of young people waving Portuguese flags saying, we're part of the Portuguese club, and hey, I'm Portuguese, hey, that's cool. You know, I think that we would attract more attention and recruit, if you will, more people, if more people saw that we actually had a presence, you know, in some of those things. And the reason it's a double-edged sword for me is because you know, the tourism of Portugal is increasing, right? Which is good for the economy there. But then there's a lot of, you know, talk about, are we letting the secret, the gem out of the bag, right? And is it going to be ruined? I don't necessarily think so, but
We can't be that selfish.
So, but anyway, those are my, I don't know if they're action items, Denise, but those are the different aspects that I was thinking.
Well, yeah, and I believe that is probably the easiest way to mainstream, which is to be present in mainstream American events. Why doesn't the 4th of July parade in every single town have a Portuguese marching band? You know, we have a marching band in a lot of different towns. There's 14 of them in California. Why is the folklore festival at a Portuguese hall? Why is it not at Disneyland or Knott's Berry Farm or, you know, or Great America, where other people watch? I mean, we all watch folklore all the time. You go to the Portuguese festivals and it's there. And so you're just, well, our problem is, how do we take, and that's what I think we need to continue discussing, how do we stop preaching to the choir? Because
we're pretty insular. How do we not be so insular?
How do we stop preaching to the choir? Because the 3rd and 4th generations are not part of the choir. Okay, they're part of the mainstream. And so in reaching the mainstream, you're going to reach the 3rd and 4th generation. You're also going to reach, you know, Portuguese Americans. But Tisha, how can associations, in your case, because you have, you know, you have, of course, the SBRSI, but also the Selma Hall, how do we reach 3rd and 4th generation, you know, because not everybody has that grandmother that you had?
That's true. You know, I'm listening to all the comments so far, and I remember, Denise, when we were doing the workshops, the Beyond Border workshops, the education piece was very, very strong in the workshops I got to attend. So that's clearly something. But I think sometimes if you start to think about it, and even in the panel today so far, the calls, those that didn't have the grandmother, went into it. It's just they needed that little piece. They just needed to be bit by the bug, so to speak, and then they're hooked. And I think that's something we actually have. We all have. You know, I have a cousin on my father's side, not Portuguese at all, but she had a Portuguese stepmother. She married a Portuguese man, so she did some right things there, but super involved in the Portuguese community in her area. And we see that, you know, you don't have to be Portuguese to love Portuguese, you know, just the fact of, you know, it's not just the food, but there is that camaraderie. But what it takes is getting someone to actually just at least come once. And so I would see it more, maybe it's because I'm from a small town as well, but it's more of a grassroots, perhaps, kind of effort. You know, it's that old school ideal of just invite one. But literally, if everybody just could get one new person to come to the festa, to the dances, then they might love to dance. And then they ask how to get more involved. We had, when I was president a few years ago, we had a queen that was very much removed. She was just doing it out of tradition. And so all of her court were just high school friends, not a lick of Portuguese in any of them. But once you started teaching the chamarita and stuff, they didn't want to leave the hall. You literally had to say, hey, we need to be back here in the morning, so you all need to get out of here. But once they were bit, and you know, you interacted with them and you treated them as an equal and you made them feel involved, they were hooked, you know. And I mean, they're not going to become board members of the hall and that kind of stuff, but at least if they come and they get more people to come, eventually through the process, you'll get one or two out of the masses that might just come just because they find something that draws them into it, that connects to them. And another piece I think that can happen is, obviously, genealogy is becoming a big thing at this point. All these DNA tests, Ancestry, 23andMe, et cetera. So everybody's finding out they're Portuguese and they didn't know it. So if you become more of a public presence, like Angela was saying, you know, here in Selma, we have a band festival. I never thought till Angela mentioned it today, the Portuguese Hall, and our queen is literally the only queen for all the groups here in Selma that is never in that band festival. Well, why couldn't they be? You know, they pay for those dresses, they have their capes, let them walk in something other than 100-degree weather in the summer because it's in the fall. So I think it's little ideas like that, and then just starting little by little and then see how they grow. Just planting that seed in the beginning. And I think more and more people will just be drawn in, Portuguese or not, because once you're bit by the culture, you know, we have spouses that aren't Portuguese, but we make them come with us, and eventually they enjoy it sometimes more than we do. So.
That's true. That's true. We talked about that yesterday a little bit. That's true. Monique mentioned that her husband likes that better sometimes than she does. Kathy, how do we get the 3rd and 4th generations involved?
Well, I'll tell you that after my first trip to the Azores, I really talked to all of my family members, my cousins, and tried to get them interested in taking a trip back to the Azores with me. And in 2018, I got my cousin Buddy and his wife, and then also my uncle Fred Aguirre. We talked about him yesterday. He was an elected official, and his wife. And they also had life-changing experience to be there in the Azores. And as soon as we got home, Fred Aguirre started planning a trip to take his children and grandchildren. So I think going to the Azores is important, but I also think that, you know, I have several great nieces and nephews and my grandchildren who at their schools, they have International Day. And I always tell the kids, please invite me, you know, I'll make soapage, I'll bring sweetbread. We can do a little chamarito lesson. We can make some traditional costumes for the children. And then when I went to the Azores the first time, I brought home a volcanic stone. Don't tell anyone in immigration that I did that because I'm not supposed to. But all of my great nieces and nephews and my grandchildren were fascinated by it. So to make it interesting, I made up a story that my grandma brought it, you know, and it was the only thing she had from her homeland because she left everything behind. And, you know, they really get into that story. So I'm trying to find ways to connect the younger ones to, you know, what I've learned and what has mattered to me and what has impacted me. And also every chance I get, I invite anybody that wants to come over, come have suppers with me, and we'll do their research, we'll do their genealogy. And my big plan is to start taking them to the islands, to the village where their ancestral birth and marriage and death records were recorded, and to let them experience what I have experienced. But I will say, Denise, the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute is doing a great job already of bringing people in. And I see more and more people getting involved and participating in these Zoom sessions. So congratulations to you on that.
Thank you, Kathy. And indeed, this afternoon, one of the sessions in Portuguese, Victor Santos, who is a community leader in Rhode Island, mentioned that, you know, quoted John F. Kennedy, you know, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And he said, you know, too many of us are waiting, you know, what can the culture do for me? No, do something for it. If you say, I'm very proud to be Portuguese, I'm very proud of the Azores, okay, but what are you going to do about it? And he says, I've started to ask that question. And that's kind of interesting. You know, he said, people tell me all the time, I'm very proud of being Azorean. Okay. And I wish more people would know about it. Okay. What are you going to do about it? You know, and so maybe we should start asking that question a little bit more, because he felt that each person could do one or two things. And if you have more and more people doing one or two things, then it mushrooms and mushrooms and mushrooms. Okay. We have a couple of comments and questions before I go to the final one. Just that bringing Azorean-Americans to the Azores and bringing Azoreans, we're actually going to be talking about that. Indeed, that's from poet Scott Edward Anderson, and Anthony Barcelos, author Anthony Barcelos, had a comment to all of us when he said that when he was a teenager in the 1960s, I think he's mistaken, I think that was 1980s, but anyway, he's entitled to one mistake. My family made a habit of inviting non-Portuguese and non-Catholic friends to attend festas in our parish. Many of them became regular attendees. Are people still doing that? I think they are. I think people are trying to bring. I know that it's changed. I know that I made that mistake when I was a young person. My wife had a colleague who was Hispanic, and she was a very needy person, and she needed we talked about the soapers and invited her and her family. She had like 5 kids, and we got very nasty looks. Why are you bringing these people to our festa? And I never went back to that festa again, by the way, because I think that, but, and I'm kind of ashamed of myself that I didn't go to the committee and make a point about it. But I was young and a little bit more naive, or not any less naive, but I think that
Denise?
people are doing a little bit of that.
Yeah, Denise, I'll just jump in and add that, you know, I don't necessarily invite people to the festivals, but the Dia de Portugal Festival in San Jose, I tell everybody about, and I
Sure.
encourage non-Portuguese to go to. I think because it is non-religious and there is a little bit more for everybody. There's a kid, you know, there's a kids area, there's dancing, there's music, there's food, there's things to buy. You know, it's just it's a much bigger event, not bigger, but like a more diverse event. You know, I think that than the Americans are used to.
Yeah, and we need a little bit more of that throughout. You know, there needs to be a little bit more replication. And before I ask you the last question, actually, one thought that I would leave with all of you and those following us here and those on social media as well. There was you know, some of the festivals are having, you know, issue with people, you know, present at the events. And it's not my idea; it's actually my son's idea. But I put it forth for him. He's put it forth a couple of times. It hasn't got any traction. Why not change the festivals to food fairs? Keep on doing the religious stuff that people like within the community. But as Angela said, not everybody's Catholic. Not everybody will go in the religious parade. But then transform the festa into a food fair. And if every festa in every community was a unique food fair, like the Greek festival or the Armenian festival, etc., we would have 100 and some odd festas in California, or 100 some odd food fairs in California. And that's an excellent way to bring in other cultures, because foods, everybody likes to try different foods. And then they'll, you know, and then bring some things that are non-traditional Portuguese in festas, like maybe works of arts, etc., you know, that people would like to look at. So there's that idea for those looking for something. It's not my idea, again, it's my son, Michael. That was his idea: transform the festas that are having issues with people, you know, present. Keep the religious part separate, keep that, you know, to invite anyone, but, you know, people understand that that's more of a Catholic thing. But if you're not Catholic, you can participate in the festa as part of the food and cultural fair. If you were the president of the government of the Azores, that's the $10,000 question. What two things, or three, would you bring to the Azorean diaspora? Would you do to bring the Azorean diaspora closer to the Azores and promote Azoreanness in the United States, in our diaspora, in our communities? What two things, or three, two or three things, do you think are fundamental that would bring us closer to the Azores and vice versa? The diaspora is very important to the Azores, and the diaspora needs to be important not just in the first generation, but the second, third, and fourth. As I've said a gazillion times, Azorean-Americans, Azorean descent folks in the United States cannot have not knowing Portuguese as a barrier to being Azorean. Okay? Not knowing the language must not be a barrier to being Azorean independently of where you live. So, Alexis, we'll start with you this time.
Denise, I'm so glad that you brought up this last point in particular. Obviously, you know, I was working with the Azorean government last semester, where I was in the Direção das Comunidades, which is basically working with Azorean communities across the world. And I think the first thing that I would do, you know, I also, just like Kathy, just like so many other people on this panel, really dove into my ancestry while I was there. And though I'm pretty conversational in Portuguese, I think it would be an incredible benefit to work with the Direção da Cultura that they have there, to put all of these records into text and make it so that, you know, you can search by name, and we can have, you know, easy translations into English, because I think if we made those resources available, so many more people would be able to dive deep into their ancestry, and just making it accessible, I think, is a huge part of it. And I think it would make an incredible difference if that were the case. I know that I hit some barriers in my research, and so that would have been incredibly helpful for me. The second thing I think I would do is, again, working with these great organizations that we have, like FLOD, like PALCUS, to be promoting, different scholarships and things. I think getting people to the Azores is crucial, as you were saying before. Just like Denise, you shared with your friend, when I went back to the church where my great grandparents were baptized, where they were married, where so many of it is my family history in Villanova, there in Terceira. Like it was emotional, and it was one of the most, like, I'm getting kind of emotional talking about it now, because it was such, a profound and special thing. And I think if more people could experience that, it would be just amazing too. So
Indeed, more easy access to records, and getting more Azorean Americans of different generations to the Azores, giving some kind of a program that entices that. And we'll go to Tisha this time. Tisha, what should Miss President of the Azores, what would you do to bring awareness?
Yes, I mean, this COVID thing has taught us all to think outside the box. This time 2 years ago, we would be doing this maybe in person. We wouldn't be doing it through something like Zoom or Facebook Live, even though that technology and those things have been here for a long time. And something that I think could be important would be, I've seen advertised more recently, people from Portugal. I haven't seen them in the Azores, but we could definitely have it, where they're advertising that through Zoom, they will basically teach you on a one-on-one class, basically conversational Portuguese. So I would say, as the government, then let's offer that to everybody here. And that way they could have at least a little bit of the language. And then once they get over that barrier of not knowing the language and being scared to go into a foreign country, because I think it's not so much just that, whereas they know they're Azorean, but it's people just have a general fear about traveling sometimes out of their comfort zone, which is the United States. Even pre-COVID times, now people are going to be obviously more distant for different reasons. But I think that if you could teach them a little bit of the language, at least so that they feel comfortable, that they could, get their food, get their transportation or whatever, even though you could, without knowing Portuguese, you could survive. They don't think that. I mean, myself included, I went to Portugal a few years ago for the St. Isabel celebration, and I thought, man, I'm gonna be hosed. I got to keep someone near me all the time. I was perfectly fine. The little bit I knew got me through the little time that I didn't have anybody with me. Same thing when I went to the Azores 2 years ago with my madrinha, and there is that feeling that everybody has said that has been there. You want to go back. You feel like you belong there, even though you've never been there before. So I think if you can get over the language barrier that people put on themselves because they really don't need it, then you get them there. And that's the other part. Once we give them a little bit and we bring them over, and then I would agree with like the genealogy type stuff. You would find out who their family backgrounds are and then take them to, the places. And then, so you're bringing the 20, 30, 40-year-olds who have their children, and their children are going to get that bug at a younger age. And it's just going to progress and progress and progress.
Indeed, and that's an excellent point. So teaching language and even cultural concepts, even culture. So have developed in the Azores an online course offered, different modalities and that would teach a little bit of the language, survival language, and also a little bit about the history of each of the islands. And it could be also even in English for those who are interested in knowing the history a little bit more and doing a little bit more of those genealogy. Getting a company actually behind it to do genealogy trips, I think, is very, very important. Carol.
I pretty much agree with what's been said on the panel so far. Again, I really promote the educational aspect of, telling people about their Portuguese heritage and about the Azores. And, when I was doing my dissertation research, I know our Portuguese organizations have a lot of scholarships out there for high school students going into college and for college students. But again, that whole aspect of having student exchange programs and having students from the United States go to the Azores, and then having students in the Azores go to America. I mean, that whole aspect, I think, needs to be worked on more. There needs to be more educational opportunities for exchange programs. Because when I went to the Azores. I'm to the University of the Azores for the summer with the Portuguese Summer Institute. I was able to get scholarship money from FLAD, but I also had to borrow money from somebody in the Portuguese community who I paid back eventually. So again, I just strongly urge student education programs. I think that will help. And again, as mentioned before, just having some educational courses on the history of the Azores or the Azores in general to people in the US would be helpful in English. I've taken Portuguese language courses myself when I was in school, but I've sort of survived just by knowing a little bit of Portuguese and just having people help me when I was in the Azores that knew Portuguese, and they translated for me. So again, that language barrier is a problem for a lot of people, but I think it can be overcome again with easier access and just having more things available in English for people to understand.
Well, and now it's changed tremendously, because in the last few years, Azoreans have been studying English since the 4th grade, and it's happened. So any teenager now in the Azores who will be 25 or 30 in a few years will already can communicate in English. Kathy, what if you were president of the government of the Azores, what 2 things would you do to bring us all together and benefit the Azores and the communities?
Sorry, that's my dog Bernie. He's getting very excited. Well, I want to thank Tricia for saying Madringa. Growing up, my godparents were always Madringa and Padring. And when I hear anybody say, my godmother, or, I just think, she's your Madringa, for goodness sakes, call her Madringa. That's her name. And my godparents are very, very important to me. But my husband and I have been very involved in exchange programs with high school students around the world. And over the years, we've had lots of students from Europe and Asia for a school year. But I propose, as the president of the Azores, my plan is it doesn't have to be for a whole school year. If we could do a 6-week study abroad program in the summer and take some junior high kids or some high school kids and take them back there, maybe even connect them with people that are their relatives that they don't know, and give them an opportunity to, and I have difficulty with language. So I think it would benefit me to go for 6 weeks and live with the family and pick up the language. And then in return, I would come home and welcome someone into my home. I'd love to see that happen. And then one of you mentioned about ancestry records. I have a friend in the Azores. He's an archivist at the library in Angra, and he is working on digitizing all of the parish records from all of the islands in the Azores so that they're available to us. And I think that's important work, because, and translate them, because it's one thing if you find a document on ancestry.com and it's in Portuguese and you have no idea what it says. But if it's been translated, or if you have an option to have it translated, it makes a huge difference. And I would streamline the dual citizenship application process. And in fact, as the president of the Azores today, I'd like to make myself dual citizenship.
Well, that one, I have to tell you, that's not the Azores' responsibility, because it would be mainland Portugal that would have to do that, and that's a different story. But indeed, I think the exchange programs. Angela, in 3 minutes, give us. You only gave me 2 action items last time, so you have 5 to go.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, I have 2, so
okay,
I'll have to do.
Two will do.
So there isn't enough programming. I would say English language programming about Portugal, about the community. I would say on TV, but I don't even think that young people watch TV anymore. So it has to be either, on Netflix, on Prime, on YouTube, on something, but there needs to be a channel that's easily accessible on the internet, on phones, that, has a a kids show, a sitcom, a game show, or a cooking show. I mean, for example, Maria Lawton, the Azorean Green Bean, she's done one season of her food show, food and travel, basically, and it's focused on the Azores. And she's had a heck of a time getting it on PBS stations nationally. It's on a few, but what if it was on every PBS station across the country and reaching people in Colorado where there's a burgeoning, Portuguese community, right? So if I was a president of Azores, I would help Maria get her show in lots of different places, but then also try to get some other programming going. And one way to do that also, second idea, is to, sorry, announcer, but hire a young Portuguese American to become an influencer. And what I mean by that is they start their own Instagram, and maybe they go over and they live there, right? And they start a YouTube channel, and they start their own Instagram channel, and they start a Snapchat channel. And all they do, their job is to go around every island and talk about food and things to see and dance and music. And because what they're going to do is they're going to showcase that there's so many modern things over there. I think one of the big misperceptions that young people may have is that there's no running water in the Azores or something, that it's all still very old. And that's not the case at all, right? I mean, there's wonderfully modern things over there, right? And so if this person's job was dedicated, and it would be in English, right? Because if a lot of young people don't speak Portuguese, had a YouTube channel and was, kayaking and hiking and riding horses and riding their bike and touring around and eating good food and having a blast and going to a club at night or whatever, if they were documenting how wonderful it was to be in the Azores, I think they would drive a really strong following, and then young people would, to Alexis's point, see how cool it is. So those are my ideas.
They're great ideas. Well, we're just about out of time. Thank you all very much for participating. I think we have I've taken some notes, and on all of you. There's a couple of comments I'd like to just share with you real quick. And one of them is from Debbie, who talked about a very important website for mainland Portugal and all of Portugal, which is called tombo.pt. It's the Torre do Tombo in Lisbon that has all of the documents. There's tons and tons of documents there that you can search. You can search, as she said, by place, year, then name in English. So tombo.pt, if anybody is interested, those of you who are, that's a great resource. Thank you, Debbie, for sharing it, because it really is. And Rui Faria from the Immigrants Association of the Azores says, don't you think that there should be a platform for us to know what programs there are by associations, by government, what is going on to help promote the Azorean bridge between the communities, of course, in the Azores. Each one has a program, and sometimes we overdrive the same goals. In other words, by having one center area, and I think that, Angela, with some of the work that's being done at Palcus, that might be an area that can be developed. But there is, indeed, we have too many things and too many people doing too many things. And sometimes, it would be great. That's why that's a very simple PFSA, Portuguese Fraternal Society of America website for pages for festas is wonderful. I mean, they have literally hundreds of thousands of hits, and people, my son's generation, tell me when they want to know about a festa, they just go to that site, and so. I think that we kind of need to bridge. That's a very good point that Rui brought, that we need kind of a one funnel platform that we can all use. Not every single hall have a platform, not every single Portuguese organization have a platform, and actually Palcus is doing a lot of work in that sense, and maybe that can serve as a catalyst for the Portuguese, and and have a specific situation for the Azores, and the Azorean government can work on that as well. Anyway, thank you all very much. I appreciate your input, your insights, your time, and stay safe and enjoy. We have a lot of events coming up, and we'll be promoting them on social media. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. And to all of you following us here on Zoom or on social media, thank you again. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
Obrigada.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Obrigado,
Bye.
obrigado.
Thank you.
Muito
Bye,
obrigado a todos.
Denise.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thanks.